Attila the Hun enters history as a conqueror, but the sharper question is what the image of Attila was made to mean. Was he only a destroyer, or did later writers turn a complex ruler into Europe's most useful symbol of fear? Attila was active in the 5th century, when the Western Roman Empire was losing control across its frontiers. Dates and details are imperfect, but the political setting is clear. Armies, refugees, diplomacy, and tribute were reshaping Europe. The Huns were not a single frozen tribe marching from one distant homeland. They were a changing confederation of groups whose alliances shifted, whose leaders negotiated, and whose power depended on movement across the steppe and frontier. Attila inherited power with his brother Bleda. For a time, the two ruled together, a reminder that the famous conqueror began inside a partnership rather than as a solitary mastermind. Their strength was not measured only in battles. The Huns could threaten a frontier, demand payment, exchange hostages, and then withdraw. Diplomacy was not the opposite of violence, it was one of its most efficient forms. The Eastern Roman government negotiated with Attila because the cost of refusing could be immediate. Gold, territory, and access were all part of the argument, and every treaty exposed how dependent imperial power had become. Ancient writers often described the Huns through the language of shock. Their bows, mobility, and unfamiliar customs became evidence of otherness. But hostile description is not the same thing as neutral observation. The mounted bow was real military technology, not a supernatural weapon. Its value came from training, range, speed, and the ability to attack while moving, forcing slower armies to fight on unfamiliar terms. Yet the Huns were not only archers. Their armies needed scouts, remounts, camp followers, interpreters, craftsmen, and allies. Mobility was a system, not a single trick, and systems are harder to defeat than weapons. When Bleda disappeared, later sources linked the event to Attila's rise. The broad succession is accepted, but the exact circumstances remain uncertain, and certainty here would go beyond the evidence. Once Attila ruled alone, his strategy became more visible. He did not need to occupy every city. He needed to make rulers believe that resistance would cost more than payment, and that belief could travel faster than an army. The Eastern Empire paid and resisted in cycles. Each agreement bought time, but it also advertised a dangerous truth: an empire built on taxes, and walls could still be forced to bargain with a mobile confederation. Attila's court was not a camp of chaos. The Roman envoy Priscus described a place with hierarchy, meals, translation, ceremony, and access rules. His account is valuable precisely because it catches power being performed. Priscus also described Attila as restrained at a formal meal, contrasting his plain behavior with the display around him. That detail does not prove a private personality, but it shows how carefully ancient observers watched status and self-control. The famous phrase about the sword of Mars belongs to a later historical tradition, not a verified object recovered from Attila's hand. It matters because symbols can become political weapons long after the original event. Jordanes, writing generations later, said a shepherd found the sword and that Attila claimed it as a sign of divine favor. The story is not a field report. It is a narrative about legitimacy, written after Attila had become legend. In 451, Attila entered Gaul. The campaign brought him into collision with a coalition associated with the Roman general Aetius and the Visigothic king Theodoric. But the battle's exact layout is reconstructed rather than filmed by history. The battle, often called the Catalonian Plains, is remembered as a decisive clash. Its location, scale, and outcome remain debated, but the coalition's existence and the campaign's shock are historically important. A common modern image shows one clean victory and one clean defeat. The evidence suggests something messier, severe losses, withdrawal, and a political balance that neither side could simply erase. The following year, Attila turned toward Italy. Cities were vulnerable, populations were moving, and stories later attached the campaign to divine punishment. The military history is real, the moral explanation belongs to interpretation. The meeting between Attila and Pope Leo became one of the most repeated images of the age. Whether the encounter alone caused the withdrawal is impossible to prove, so the famous scene should be treated as a remembered explanation, not a complete military report. Disease, supply problems, diplomacy, and strategic calculation may all have mattered in Italy. History often resists the single dramatic cause because real decisions arrive as a pile of pressures, not one perfect sentence. Attila's power reached into the politics of both Roman empires, but it was never a modern nation-state. It was a personal coalition whose strength depended on loyalty, rewards, fear, and the ability to keep moving. That structure explains both Attila's reach and its fragility. A coalition can move quickly when one leader wins, yet fracture quickly when the flow of tribute stops or succession becomes uncertain. Attila died in 453 after a wedding feast. According to the main written tradition, the story says he suffered a sudden internal hemorrhage, but the report is ancient, brief, and not medically verifiable. The secrecy around the burial became part of the legend. Later accounts describe a hidden grave and a river diverted for the burial, but no verified tomb has been identified, so the image remains folklore rather than archaeology. After Attila, his sons tried to hold the coalition together. The revolt of subject peoples and the defeat at Nidao in 454 exposed how quickly a personal empire could lose its center. The collapse does not mean the Huns vanished overnight. People, horses, customs, and political memories continued through new alliances. What disappeared was the concentration of power that made Attila exceptional. Medieval Europe remembered Attila through chronicles, saints' lives, heroic poems, and border legends. Each tradition changed the emphasis, turning a 5th-century ruler into a character who could warn, glorify, or frighten a later audience. In Hungarian tradition, Attila became an ancestral and national figure. That does not make every genealogical claim historical, but it shows how memory can turn a feared outsider into a source of identity. Modern popular culture often compresses Attila into a slogan: barbarian, scourge, destroyer. Those labels are memorable, but they hide the administrative work of tribute, negotiation, intelligence, and coalition management. The strongest evidence is not a perfect portrait. It is the pattern left across sources: Roman payments, frontier campaigns, diplomatic encounters, archaeological traces, and later stories that must be separated rather than blended together. So what should we keep? Attila was a 5th-century ruler who used mobility, violence, diplomacy, and reputation to pressure Roman states. The Sword of Mars, the hidden grave, and the single cause legends belong to a later layer of meaning. Attila's world was not outside politics, it was politics moving at speed across frontiers. Tribute, hostages, envoys, gifts, threats, and negotiated settlements were as important as the image of horsemen appearing suddenly from the steppe. That distinction does not make the story smaller, it makes it more human. Attila was not a monster outside history, he was a ruler inside a world of incentives, fear, bargaining, and memory, a world that kept rewriting him. Roman writers give us much of the surviving portrait, so the evidence must be read carefully. They feared Attila, bargained with him, described him, and sometimes turned him into a moral warning about Rome's own weakness. Attila's legacy is not a single portrait, it is a record of how later ages turned a feared ruler into a symbol of power, destruction, and the danger of letting legend speak louder than evidence. That makes the symbols around Attila powerful but unstable. Sword legends, divine favor, terror, and kingship reveal how later audiences explain success when ordinary diplomacy and military pressure seemed too small for the story.